Hi, everyone. I've got 7 o'clock over here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Holly Brand, and I work for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. I'm going to be facilitating the webinar here this evening. And before we get started, I do just want to go over a few quick reminders for everyone. Your cameras, microphones, chat, all of that is going to be disabled during our webinar this evening. If you have any questions during our presentations today, please use the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of the screen in Zoom. It looks kind of like a little chat bubble. There will be several presentations here this evening. After each one is when we are going to be taking questions for that particular proposal. So please, feel free to ask questions at that time. If you would like to provide comments about the proposed regulation changes here today, please submit them through our online portal. Any comments left through Zoom will not be recorded. Tomorrow, at some point, you'll receive a follow-up email from Zoom with contact information if you have any additional questions, in addition to links to our online portal and our YouTube page where this recording is going to be published. And with that, I think I've covered everything I need to, so I'm going to hand it over to our first presenter here for this evening.
Thank you, Holly. My name is Sean Oldenberger. I'm the Small Game Program Director, and I hope everybody enjoyed their day. It's a nice day here in Austin. Currently, I'm in Austin headquarters here in 4200 Smith School Road. And so this evening, we're going to give you some background information and summaries of proposals that the department is proposing to change to the Commission for hunting regulations for the 22-23 hunting seasons. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background as far as process goes. This can be a little confusing to folks if you're first time understanding the Commission process. But ultimately, the statute authority lies with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission to make changes to hunting and fishing regulations on an annual basis. Underneath their authority, there's a 9-person member. Those are appointed by the governor. They're actually confirmed by the Senate with at least a 2/3 majority. So those 9 individuals that are appointed to the commission by the governor's office actually make the decisions with regards to any proposed changes to hunting regulations in any given year. For instance, this year on January 26th, that's when we held a commission meeting here in Austin, Texas, in our commission hearing room. At that time, the commission did give us authority to publish proposed changes in the Texas State Register. So basically right now we have proposals to change 2 proclamations the way it's built into statute. One being the statewide hunting proclamation and the other one being a migratory game bird proclamation. So those, what we're going to report tonight are the proposed changes to those 2 proclamations. We will take public comment. Officially started on February 18th when those proposals were actually published in the Texas State Register. If you're not familiar, the Texas State Register is where all state agencies go to publish proposed regulations and open the public comment period for those regulation changes. And so after we receive all public comment, even up to the day of the commission meeting, basically on on March 24th, we will present in front of the commission here at TPWD headquarters. At that time, we will lay out to the commissioners the proposed regulation change and give them a summary of public comment to them. At that time, it'll be up to the commission to make decisions, to make the ultimate decision whether any of the proposed regulations changes are adopted for the 22-23 hunting season. So hopefully, if anybody has any questions with regard to the process, I'll make sure to look in the Q&A here as we move forward. Tonight, we're actually going to have 3 presenters. Myself, I will be last presenting proposed changes to the Migratory Game Bird Proclamation and to wild turkey hunting regulations. We also have Sean Gray on here, who is the Mule Deer and Pronghorn program leader, who's based out of Alpine. And then we have Alan Kane, who is our white-tailed deer program leader, who's based out of Pleasanton. And so we will get moving forward with the proposed changes to the statewide hunting proclamation. And so Alan Kane will start with those.
All right, thank you, Sean. Let me share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Good evening. Again, my name's Alan Kane. I'm the Whitetail Deer Program Leader for the Wildlife Division. For this segment of the public hearing presentation, I'll be presenting proposed changes to the statewide big game harvest regulations and some regulations pertaining to proof of sex and tagging in cold storage facilities. The first proposal that our staff will be presenting to the commission for consideration later this month in March is a result of a petition for rulemaking that the department received this past summer. The petitioners requested that the department allow the take of white-tailed deer by firearms in Collin, Dallas, Grayson, and Rockwall counties, which are those counties outlined in red on the map on the screen. And they also fall within Deer Management Unit 21, that area in yellow, that's shaded in yellow there. After reviewing the petition, staff agreed with the petitioner's request and recommended pursuing this change. And currently, these counties allow harvest by archery equipment only during all seasons. Current regulatory surveys conducted in Deer Management Unit 21, again, that area in yellow, estimate that the deer population would be about 11,300 deer, with a deer density of about 1 deer per every 80 acres. And then when you look at the statistical confidence intervals for our survey data, it estimates the range of deer between a density between 1 deer for every 18 acres to 1 deer for every 356 acres. So the way we look at that is that those areas would have highly fragmented habitat across the DMU, they result in these wide confidence intervals. And so those areas with good deer habitat are likely to support higher densities on that range of a deer to every 18 acres. And then on the other side of the spectrum, those poor quality habitats or areas with limited habitat support lower densities approaching 356 acres per deer. So the deer population estimate in DMU 21 is similar to other surrounding deer management units, such as Deer Management 22 to the west, with a density of 1 deer per 70 acres, and Deer Management Unit 20 to the south with 1 deer for every 118 acres. And both of these DMUs currently allow take by firearm during general youth and MLD seasons in those particular areas. So, and then the antler restrictions are also present in these 4 counties, Collin, Dallas, Grayson, and Rockwall counties. And the age structure is expected to be similar to the surrounding DMUs, where the counties also have antler restriction in place. And the majority of the harvest, 66%, is comprised of bucks 3.5 years of age or older, which is what the intent is with the antler restriction regulation. Staff believe allowing the take by firearm during general youth and MLD seasons will not have adverse impacts on the population and are proposing the following changes. One is to remove the prohibition on the use of crossbows during archery season in Collin, Dallas, Grayson, and Rockwall counties. Allow for take by firearm during the youth, general season, and on MLD properties during MLD season in these counties. Implement a 4-day doe season during the general season, and require mandatory harvest reporting of bucks and antlerless deer so we can monitor the impacts of potential regulation changes on that deer population. The next change staff are taking to the commission for consideration is to modify the definition of buck and antlerless deer to clarify for hunters and for law enforcement purposes that the tag requirements for odd scenarios such as antlered does, buck fawns, or shed antler bucks. And so the proposed modification would clarify that antlerless deer are deer having no antler protruding, no antler points, or a deer with no antlers, such as a shed antler buck. And then the buck deer is a deer having a hardened antler point protruding through the skin, or a deer having antler growth in velvet greater than 1 inch. The next proposed change concerns the proof of sex requirements for buck deer, which currently includes the head, but staff are also proposing to include the tail and unskinned skull cap with antlers attached as the second option for proof of sex. This additional proof of sex option aids in CWD management or chronic wasting disease management and allows hunters to leave the most infectious parts of those animals, i.e. the brain, at the site of harvest rather than move that particular, the brain material or other potential infectious parts to other areas of the state. And the last proposal concerns cold storage facilities, tagging requirements, and proof of sex. Current regulations state that the proof of sex requirements cease once tagging requirements cease. At a commercial cold storage facility, tagging requirements cease once a deer is quartered and the appropriate information for that harvest is entered in the cold storage record book. The current rule creates an unnecessary burden by requiring the head to be retained for a carcass that is not quartered versus a quartered carcass where the proof of sex requirements cease once that has been entered in the cold storage log. And then the head can be retained by the hunter or discarded and removed by the locker plant. So staff are proposing to allow the proof of sex to cease in a commercial cold storage facility business after the deer has been entered in the cold storage log, regardless of whether the deer is quartered or it's a whole carcass. So to facilitate these proposed changes, staff will need to make distinctions between several types of commercial cold storage facilities, such as a brick and mortar business versus a commercial cold storage facility on a private ranch, and also what is considered a final destination as it relates to the tagging requirements. So under this proposed change, a definition for a type 1 cold storage facility would be created, which is a place of business for the purpose of storing or processing game and is open to the public for a for-profit business or basis, And a type 2 facility would be a facility that's not open to the public on demand and that is used to store or process game taken on a property, or i.e. a private ranch where hunting occurs for individuals by pay or for pay. Staff are also proposing to create a definition of a final destination for deer or deer carcass parts to include not only the permanent residence of the hunter or a person in possession of the carcass parts, but also add the addition of a type 1 commercial cold storage facility to that definition of final destination. Again, the type 1 facilities are those brick and mortar businesses, the deer processor areas. So at a type 1 facility, staff are also proposing to allow the proof of sex and tagging requirements to cease once the harvest is entered in the cold storage log or record book. And the harvest location is also recorded by the cold storage facility, which would include the ranch and county name. Although carcass tagging requirements would cease as far as the tag or the wildlife resource document on the carcass, the cold storage facility would still be required to retain the tag or wildlife resource document while in possession of the carcass or any carcass part to aid in law enforcement or purposes in case that is needed. So at a type 2 facility, again, those ranches where hunting occurs for pay, or a private non-commercial cold storage facility, ranches where hunting occurs for no pay, the proposed change would also require that deer must be at least quartered and entered in the cold storage record book before the proof of sex requirement and tagging requirements cease. Essentially, there's no change in how these cold storage facilities operate today, and the proposed change is a primary clarification in rule as a result of needing to define several types of cold storage facility types. So that concludes my portion of the presentation, and let's take a quick look and see what's in the questions, if I can answer some of those. Okay, first question is from Richard Johnson, and the question is, who made the petition, or who petitioned the firearm change in those counties? And Dr. Harry Jacobson and a fellow named Tim Condict are the people that sent the petition for rulemaking request in. And then there's multiple questions from Daryl Hell, and I'll just kind of go down the list real quick. When was the survey done for that deer count, and what percentage of deer were in Grayson County versus the rest? So the survey was conducted, our staff, Wildlife Division staff, conduct regulatory surveys anytime between July 15th and October 1st. That's our window to survey the different deer management units out there. And I think there's 5 survey routes, anywhere from 8 to 15 miles long in the deer management unit. And I believe 3 of those are in Grayson County. But we can double check. And I think there was 2 lines in Collin County. Obviously, Dallas County, there's very little deer habitat. And so we don't have survey routes in there of any length. But most of the deer habitat is in Collin and Grayson County. Next question, what safety considerations have been made for higher density counties that are 1 million plus, which 2 of these counties are? The third county is Rockwall and has similar topography. I'm not sure if I quite understand the question. If you're talking about safety considerations in the context of people population density, the department doesn't regulate discharge of firearms on private properties. That's handled, and obviously the safety aspects that come along with that is handled at county or city ordinances where you can discharge a firearm and where you can't. Again, from Daryl Hale, can this petition be opposed or request to be viewed on a county by county basis or on local safety considerations? Again, you can provide comment, whatever you would like, including if safety is a concern for you, can certainly let us know. Again, on the website where you can provide some public comment and outline that concern. But as I just mentioned, safety considerations as far as discharge of firearms are regulated by county or city ordinances. Let's see. And then another question, are you available to come to Collin County Monday to answer questions at the Commissioner Court meeting? Unfortunately, it will not be available Monday. However, we will have a public hearing on March 9th at 7 p.m. in Sherman, Texas. It'll be at the college there. There should be information on our website where that public hearing will be available. And so I'll be up there then. And then again, there's a rumor someone at Parks and Wildlife stands to gain monetarily from the change of this rifle seasons. That's simply not true. This is a petition for rulemaking request received. The department is responding to this based on biological data and hunter opportunity. So, and were the other question, were the biologists in those counties able to determine the buck-doe ratio? Yeah, so based on the survey data and what they collected, it shows it to be 1 deer for every, or 1 buck for every 23 does. And so there's quite a disparity there, which makes a little sense. Archery harvest is probably skewed towards bucks in those counties rather than does. And keep in mind, that's across the entire deer management unit. There's areas probably within Grayson and Collin County where the sex ratio is much tighter than that. But on the across the area, that's what the ratio is. And so at this point, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass the presentation over to Sean Gray for his portion.
Sorry. I think everybody can hear me now. Good evening. Again, my name is Sean Gray. I'm the mule deer program leader for the department. And this evening, I'd like to share with you some of our data from our mule deer experimental antler restriction that we've been doing the last 4 hunting seasons, and some proposed changes to our mule deer hunting regulations. Okay, so this slide is of, this illustrates our current mule deer hunting seasons in the state. The yellow and blue color counties have a 16-day general season. And those red colored counties have a 9-day general season that starts the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And they have no special archery season. However, the yellow and blue color counties do. And again, those blue color counties are where we conducted our experimental mule deer antler restriction in 6 Southeast Panhandle counties, and also in Lynn County and the 6 Southeast Panhandle counties. We started those in 2018. Lynn County was in 2019. And again, the Southeast Panhandle counties have provided us with 4 hunting seasons of data. In Lynn County, 3 hunting seasons worth of data. In the green color counties in the Trans-Pecos, we have a 17-day general season starting the Friday after Thanksgiving with a special archery season. And all general seasons are buck only. So prior to the experiment in the Southeast Panhandle, excessive buck harvest occurred primarily because of increased lease hunting and the popularity of mule deer hunting. This excessive buck harvest affected the mule deer sex ratio in the area, with our survey data indicating a postseason sex ratio of about 5 does to 1 buck. In addition, past intensive buck harvest impacted the buck age structure. Because of this, staff received many requests from landowners and hunters to improve the buck age structure of the mule deer herd in this area of the Panhandle. So most Western states have tried an antler point restriction, such as a minimum of 4 points on one side, with no significant improvement in buck age structure. And this is because many young deer meet these minimum standards, and we tested a different antler restriction criterion. Using the white-tailed deer antler restriction as a model, staff collected data on mule deer captured during ongoing research projects and hunter harvested mule deer in the Panhandle to estimate the ear tip to ear tip spread of bucks standing in the alert position. And the average ear tip to ear tip spread for mule deer bucks standing in alert position is 21 inches, and it's demonstrated in the picture there. Because the average ear tip to ear tip spread on Panhandle bucks is 21 inches, staff proposed to use a restriction with an outside spread of the main beams of 20 inches to protect younger age bucks, and it closely matched the distance between ear tips when a buck is standing in alert position. And the outside spread is estimated in a similar manner as the inside spread, but by using the outside measurement in the antler material. These illustrations will be used to demonstrate what type of buck could be harvested or those that were protected during their experimental mule deer antler restriction. Using the average ear tip to ear tip measurement in the alert position as a guide, which is 21 inches, and it's showed by those blue dashed lines. The buck on the left would be legal for harvest with an outside spread of 20 inches or greater. It would not be legal to harvest the buck on the right because his outside spread is less than 28 inches. And even young deer have an ear tip to ear tip spread of 21 inches. Also, unbranched antler bucks with an outside spread of less than 20 inches would be illegal for harvest, as shown in these examples. This is different compared to the white-tailed deer antler restriction regulations. Our main goal there with the antler restriction in terms of unbranched antlered bucks is to get those bucks into older age classes. And most unbranched antler bucks are yearlings, and allowing more yearlings to be harvested can significantly impact the future age structure, especially during drought. Okay, so our data suggests that the antler restriction with an outside spread of 20 inches protected at least 80% of 1.5 to 3.5 year old bucks, and about 80% of bucks 4.5 years of age or older were harvestable. At the check stations, we have staff during the experiment within the Southeast Panhandle counties. The number of bucks checked each year has been higher than in the initial year of 2018. Staff believe this may be correlated with the number of harvestable bucks on the landscape in each year. In addition, staff get reports from hunters who check their animals, and these reports seem to validate that idea. And also notice the pink ear tags attached to the buck. This buck was part of our multi-year mule deer research project within the Panhandle to study the influence of agriculture on mule deer movements, habitat use, and survival. The buck was captured, ear tagged, and radio collared as a fawn in 2016. Therefore, we know exactly how old the buck was when he was harvested, and pink 20 was 4.5 years of age and with an outside spread of 21 6/8 inches. These known age research deer have proven invaluable during our experiment. Data from our check stations in the Southeast Panhandle are providing more evidence that the buck age structure of the harvested animals is becoming older and more natural. This graph demonstrates that prior to the experiment, over 20% of the harvest was comprised of 1.5 and 2.5 year old bucks, with only 33% being 5.5 to 8.5 plus years of age. After 4 hunting seasons of the experiment, only 1% of the deer checked were aged within the young age class, that 1.5 to 2.5 year olds, and 50% were in the mature age class, the 5.5 to 8.5 plus years of age. This graph illustrates data collected from our winter helicopter and ground count surveys. Information collected from 2005 to 2018, which was prior to the experiment, estimated an average sex ratio of 4.7 does per buck, which is an indicator of intense buck harvest. During the next 3 years of the experimental antler restriction, the average sex ratio was 2.9 does per buck. Substantially more bucks were observed during 2019 to 2021 postseason helicopter surveys and ground counts than in years past. The improvement in sex ratio from 2019 to 2021 is further evidence that the experiment is having positive population impacts. This map shows a black crosshatched area that is one of several Panhandle mule deer monitoring units. And this is the scale at which we monitor mule deer within the state of Texas. The current mule deer antler restriction counties in the Southeast Panhandle encompass most of this mule deer monitoring unit. However, staff believe we should incorporate 7 additional counties that would almost completely contain the monitoring unit. This map shows how the proposed mule deer antler restriction change would look like in the Southeast Panhandle, which includes 13 counties instead of the current 6. Another proposed change would be to expand the antler restriction out from Lynn County into all the current 9-day counties and extend the season to 16 days, as well as include the special archery season. The main idea is to provide more hunting opportunity while using the antler restriction to maintain or improve mule deer sex ratios and buck age structure. This map now shows how these 2 mule deer regulation proposals would fit in the current mule deer seasons. All 15 9-day counties are proposed to change to a 16-day season with the special archery season, just like the yellow color counties. However, these counties would be under the new antler restriction. The other proposal in the Panhandle would be to implement the antler restriction in 13 counties instead of 6 counties in the Southeast Panhandle. Staff believe the mule deer antler restriction proposals should not apply in any CWD zone, which are delineated in this map by the red crosshatching, which is the containment zone, and purple hatching, which is the surveillance zone. Therefore, portions of Palmer, Randall, Lubbock, and Lynn counties within the CWD zones would not be subject to the proposed antler restriction. Current science indicates that increased buck harvest will reduce CWD prevalence rates in bucks and may inhibit natural CWD expansion into new areas. The last proposed mule deer regulation change would be to add an experimental antler restriction to Terrell County, the light green color county in the map. In the lower third of Terrell County, south of US Highway 90, intense buck harvest has skewed sex ratios and severely reduced buck age structure, even more so than the original counties that when we proposed in the Panhandle. In this part of Terrell County, there are numerous small landowner tracts where mule deer hunting pressure is high. And staff will monitor the experiment in Terrell County through an incentive-based voluntary check station in Dryden and annual postseason helicopter surveys. So staff conducted an opinion survey to gauge constituent support of the current experimental antler restriction and potential expansion into other areas of the Panhandle and Terrell County. So last fall, staff used a hybrid survey with 2 email blasts and 1 mail out that was sent to 17,439 individuals. Hunters numbered 8,310 and resided within the proposed counties. The remainder of those sampled were landowners that participated in MLDP or antlerless mule deer permits last year or owned property of over 50 acres or more in the proposed counties. We received more than 2,300 replies for a response rate of 13%. 60% of the respondents from across the Panhandle supported continuing the experimental antler restriction in the current counties. And 64% of the respondents that resided or owned property within the current experimental antler restriction counties supported continuing the antler restriction. About 60% of respondents from across the Panhandle and those who resided or owned land within the proposed neighboring counties supported expanding the experimental antler restriction into those neighboring counties, with less than 20% that did not support that. Similar to the results of expanding the antler restriction to neighboring counties, about 60% of respondents from across the Panhandle and those who resided or owned land within the proposed Southwest Panhandle counties supported expanding the experimental antler restriction, as well as extending the current 9-day season to 16 days. About 25% of the respondents did not support expanding the antler restriction and extending the season in the Southwest Panhandle. For Terrell County, about 70% of hunters and landowners who responded supported expanding the experimental antler restriction into Terrell County, with 21% of the respondents did not support that. Given the favorable feedback from the opinion survey and the positive population impacts from the antler restriction, staff proposed to make the antler restriction permanent in the current 7-day counties and expand to an additional 21 counties in the Panhandle. In addition to proposing the antler restriction in the 15 counties in the Southwest Panhandle, staff proposed to extend the 9-day season to 16-day season with a special archery season. Staff also proposed to test the experimental antler restriction in Terrell County. With this proposal, any buck with an outside spread of 20 inches or greater would be legal for harvest. Thus, any buck with a spread less than 20 inches would not be legal to harvest, regardless of unbranched antlers. The antler restriction currently does not apply to MLDP properties, and staff proposed this to continue. As part of the MLDP programs, TPWD sets property-specific bag limits, which for mule deer are generally conservative. Staff also proposed that the antler restriction not apply in any CWD zone. Staff will monitor success of the experimental antler restriction in Terrell County using population surveys, for example, sex ratios, and a voluntary check station to collect more antler and ear tip measurements, as well as buck age structure. And that's my part of the hunting regulation changes for the upcoming season. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time. So we have a couple of questions from O.W. Schneider. Will these restrictions apply to ranches in the MLDP program? No, they will not. And his other question will be, or is, can an exception be implemented for bucks 5.5 years plus that do not meet the 20-inch spread, such as a 7.5-year-old buck that scores 180, but has a 19-inch spread similar to older management type bucks? As part of the experiment, I know that our game wardens did not write any tickets on any bucks that were within an inch of that antler restriction. So I would say somebody that had shot 180-inch, 19-inch spread deer probably would not get a ticket. I don't think we can make an exception to the rule. It's just our game wardens doing an outstanding job of using common sense when these things are come up. And obviously the antler restriction is not perfect, and they do their best to use their their discretion at some of these instances. And like I said, we never had any mature bucks that were 19 inches that got a ticket for four hunting seasons. So I would assume that would continue. And another question, can we search by county for these restrictions on your website? I'm not sure what you're really asking there. We do have a web page dedicated to the experimental antler restriction, all of the data that we collected and about our check stations and the prizes and whatnot. So if that's what you're asking, or maybe these proposed changes that you're asking about, I don't know. Can you clarify your question?
Hey, Sean, this is Sean Oldberger. If he answers later on, you can answer it as it comes in, but I think cool. We probably should just move on.
Awesome. Thank y'all.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen, folks. All right, Pete said my audio or my mic was a little bit scratchy earlier on when we first started the presentation. So if Pete is still on, or for someone else can make sure that I am a little bit better as far as audio coming through to you folks,
Sounds good so far, Sean.
All right, good. Glad to hear it. Just want to make sure everybody's being able to understand what I'm saying. Okay, so we're going to move on to two things. And so Sean and Alan did a good job of summarizing the proposed changes to the statewide hunting proclamation. I'm going to continue that with regards to changes in, and everybody can see my screen. For some reason, it is not forwarding. All right, there we go. I guess it went forward now. So I'm going to go on for wild turkey regulations. That's the only change the small game program has to the statewide hunting proclamation proposed to the commission.
Hey, Sean,
so
your
yes.
audio is breaking up a little bit again.
Is that any better?
We'll see. I'll let you know if it gets scratchy again.
Okay, all right. Well, I apologize for that again. Not sure if it's a computer or not. So the first one is a proposal to actually close the eastern side of Ellis County to wild turkey regulations. This currently has a basically a 4-bird bag limit in this county on the east side of Ellis County. And the whole county that we plan on closing the eastern Ellis County to turkey hunting. The reason for that, if you look at this map, is you can see those green circles right there. The department has been heavily involved in a wild turkey restoration project since about 2018 in the eastern third of Texas. As many folks do know, eastern turkeys have had a great rebound across the United States with regards to state agencies and nonprofits moving birds around. In a lot of places, it's been very successful. One of the few places in the United States that have not been successful for turkey restoration is eastern Texas. And so the department kind of relooked at what had been done in the past and what possibly could be done in the future. And we did have some new research that came out of Texas A&M University to kind of give us some guidance on some new stocking rates, how we could do that and how we could release birds in the future on these sites. And so we're doing that with the eastern turkeys in the eastern counties, the farther east in those counties that have a special season and mandatory reporting. But what we're also doing is we're looking in this area where we have the mix between Rio Grande turkeys and eastern wild turkeys and kind of this hybrid area. And so this is part of that area where we historically believe that those two subspecies came together and hybridized. And so here we have basically the trendy watershed along here where these birds are. And so we've done a fairly good job of releasing birds up there in Kaufman County, the top green circle, and then down those other green circles is there in Navarro County and continuing down through the watershed. And so we really look to make connectivity with those birds in these releases, and the department doing a lot of work on these restoration projects on private lands and some public lands. And so here's another map. And so this dictates here kind of where the closure area would occur for the hunting season in Ellis County. Based on surveys that have been done and observations by TPW biologists in the last 10 years, there really were very few wild turkeys in Ellis County. And in fact, basically, if you can see those gray boxes on that map, that's where we currently have wild turkeys that we know of occupancy of wild turkeys in Ellis County. You can actually see there quite a bit of boxes are surrounding those two on the eastern side of the river there, where those releases occurred. That's where a lot of birds have been seen in the last few years, where we released some of those Rio Grande turkeys that have come from central Texas and South Texas. And so those boxes really did not exist prior to those releases. And we do mark all of our birds with leg bands. And those green areas actually are closed to turkey. Those counties are closed to turkey hunting. And so we've actually had birds moved into a limited amount of habitat in eastern Ellis County. And since we really want these birds to be as successful as possible, our proposal to the commission is to close Ellis County to reduce that harvest until a time where we feel that's feasible to open back up these counties and have sustainable populations for the future. All right, so with regards to moving on from the statewide hunting proclamation, I will now move on to the migratory game bird proclamation. I will give a little background here. Just so everybody is aware, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service ultimately controls regulations on migratory game birds. That's through the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that was passed in 1918. So the Fish and Wildlife Service really has the ultimate say. Generally, they kind of give us, in a very basic sense, they kind of give us the rules of the road, and we have to play by those rules. And so they tell us when we can open seasons, when we can close seasons, and then we have to set a number of days in between those periods. So I'll move on to that, but just so everyone's aware, there is a federal process that goes with migratory game bird regulations, just not a state process. And so this is a little bit more complicated. First of all, we will start with a state issue on the migratory game bird regulations. So there's no federal framework changes this year except inclusion of veteran waterfowl hunting. There was a bill passed a few years ago, the John D. Dingell Management Act, which allowed veterans to have a special opportunity for waterfowl hunting. And basically, we did not have statute authority to offer that because hunting opportunities in the state of Texas must be fair and equitable for everybody. So we needed statute authority to do that, much like youth seasons. And so this last session, that authority was granted to the department when that bill was signed by the governor. And so we're being allowed to do that moving forward. And we'll go into a couple of these things a little bit later. Here, I will tell you that there are some changes to daily bag limits proposed for waterfowl hunting. The one would be the elimination of the hooded merganser daily bag limit. This was a species along with wood duck. There was a large concern in the 50s and 60s due to basically that species doing a timber harvest, areas being cleared for nesting areas. Basically, there wasn't old growth trees that provided snags and area cavities for these birds to nest in the eastern 1/3 of the United States. Since then, the 50s and 60s, both wood ducks and hooded mergansers have really come back. And so this was one of those regulations that was on the book when we looked at the states getting together that really didn't make sense today. Hooded mergansers are not highly sought after in Texas. We harvest somewhere in the neighborhood about 2,000 to 3,000 on an annual basis. So very limited harvest compared to about the 800,000 a million ducks we actually shoot statewide with our approximately 100,000 waterfowl hunters we have on an annual basis. And so the proposal moving forward to the commission is elimination of that daily bag limit. Another thing too is the department really looks at simplification of regulations. One of the things that we had here in the Central Flyway and in Texas, we had a daily bag limit of 5 mergansers and 6 for ducks. Mergansers are ducks. They're just another tribe off in that group of ducks. And so it made a lot of sense when really there aren't a whole lot of mergansers harvested in the Central Flyway to combine those two daily bag limits into a single daily bag limit. So mergansers were 5, ducks were 6. And so we're just rolling mergansers into the duck daily bag limit. Another one here that I should mention is the federal sandhill crane hunting permit. That has been going on for quite some time in Texas. The reason we have that is because sandhill cranes, there are a lot of concerns about harvest of sandhill cranes. They're a long-lived species. They do not take a whole lot of harvest. And so we have to regulate that harvest and that population as well as we can with our monitoring programs. And so one of the things we do is everyone that does go sandhill crane hunting does get one of these permits. The Fish and Wildlife Service samples about 26% of those folks for harvest surveys to make sure we have an accurate and precise estimate of harvest for those species. And so one thing we did a few years ago is when we combined early and late season proclamations into a single, what we have migratory game for proclamation, we erroneously left this requirement out. So basically we're reauthorizing this again as a proposal to the commission to make sure we can continue this for this next hunting season. All right, moving on, and just mention those veteran waterfowl hunting days again. That was approved in federal frameworks and by Congress and the president through the John Dingell Jr. Conservation Management and Recreation Act of 2019. And then that was signed in by law by former President Trump. And then this last year, as I mentioned, last legislative session, SB 675, sponsored by Cold Course, was passed through the Senate and House and then signed by the governor. So we're allowed to do that. Currently, staff are proposing to have that concurrent with youth-only waterfowl seasons on that weekend. And then also while veterans would be hunting, they would have to have a proof of veteran status. And so that would basically be any federal paperwork they have that shows they are proof of a veteran. Also, for folks that do go into basically get their driver's license, they can have veteran written across their driver's license. That would also be a proof of veteran status. And so just kind of look at this calendar wise, you can see there, this is kind of High Plains Mallard Management Unit, our proposals moving forward. You can see there in basically on October 22nd, 23rd are the youth waterfowl hunting seasons. We would put veterans there as well. We do have a little bit of, I haven't heard some comments as far as not putting these things on the same weekend, but when we actually look at our use on our wildlife management areas and other places across the state, the number of use we have out hunting this weekend is pretty limited compared to a regular hunting season, those days in green. And so we don't think there would be any issues with more folks on the landscape really hunting during this season. Also, this also takes care of those two special requirements on the same days. If we did them on separate days, we would have to take days away from the regular hunting season and more hunter opportunity. All right, moving on to another proposed goose hunting regulation that we do have. This is a change. We have actually had a fair amount of public comment this last year on the western zone of goose hunting. On the eastern side of that zone, in Knox, Haskell counties, that area, we do get a large number of greater white-fronted geese that migrate early into the state, as early as late October, early November. And whereas the traditional cacklers that show up in the panhandle come much later from Canada and the Arctic. And so to kind of mediate that and kind of make sure we can balance that hunter opportunity between these two groups of hunters, we're proposing to move goose season a little earlier this year, a week earlier in the western zone, to actually be able to capture those greater white-fronted geese earlier on the eastern side of the west zone in those counties, to allow a little bit more hunter opportunity for folks. So that is the proposal to the commission with regards to this change. And here you can see my contact information. You have this up here. I should mention these are all proposals to the commission, and they'll obviously make a decision on that on March on the 24th. And then subsequently, those decisions we will put out in a press release, and then they'll be added to our outdoor annual process, which we're starting right now as well. I do see a few questions up here. So let me see if I can see this. So Texas, let's see here. So Miles asked, so Texas is going to have a Veteran Youth Day or days added to the duck season. Technically, there's no days added to the season. Those youth special days were 2 days. We're allowed to overlap those and have Veterans Days as 2 days as well. So those will occur during the same days. We do have a maximum number of days we are allowed to hunting. And so if we would put those on separate days, we would probably have to reduce the number of other days, especially like in the High Plains management area. You're only allowed 107 days of exposure to ducks on an annual basis. And so we're looking at teal seasons and things like that. We just have to balance all this out. So we can go in concurrent during that same 2 days seem like the best reason. All right. And let's see. Pete also asked about regular duck seasons. Pete, my contact information is here. If you can shoot me an email, please do so I can send you what the proposals are for duck seasons in the LaGrange area. Once again, all hunting seasons except those outlined here are basically going to be calendar shifts, at least proposals to the commission for next hunting season. And then once again, Miles asked, can a weekend be added to the end of the season for veterans youth? We're only allowed 2 days of opportunity under federal frameworks. We're going to run those concurrently as proposed to the commission. And I think that is the number that takes care of the questions that I had on my end. We can give it another minute or here to see if we have any additional questions with regards to Sean or Alan or myself. Holly, and then
so while we're waiting for maybe the last few questions to come in, I do just want to go over again what to expect from us tomorrow in the form of email anyway. You will be receiving that follow-up email from Zoom with again, those links to our YouTube page where you're going to be able to find this recording, as well as link to our online portal and some email addresses as well that you can use to reach out to our Parks and Wildlife staff about the proposals that we presented here this evening. All of that should go out sometime tomorrow. I'm not exactly sure when Zoom usually sends it out, but it'll be there at some point. I think that's really everything that I had to go over. I don't know if you want to give it another minute or two.
Yeah, we can give another minute. Obviously, the easiest way, as Holly mentioned, is to go online and submit your public comment that way. That's probably the easiest way for you to give as much information as you want within those boxes and proposed changes online. Holly, it seems like we're starting to drop the number of participants.
Perfect, then we'll go ahead and wrap up. And again, if we're wrapping up maybe before you were able to type your answer in, please look out for that email from Zoom tomorrow and you'll be able to follow up with our presenters here through those email addresses. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to all of our Parks and Wildlife panelists as well for coming out this evening. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.